The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 5th day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico, and it is suddenly warmer here in March. We've been having quite the zigzag weather. A few days ago it was 10 degrees in the early morning. Then this morning it was 40 degrees in the early morning. It's hard to know what to think. Actually, it's probably better not to think, just to experience it as it comes forth. The poor plants are going to have a challenge with this zigzag weather. It's been warming in California, and we normally receive California weather. So I'd like to do a kind of an in-depth sharing with you of the nature of Zen practice. It's not something that's normally talked about, but at least not the way it'll be talked about shortly. But it's important to understand this. It can help with understanding what might be going on with us at any given time in our Zen practice, particularly if we're in residential practice. Let's start by saying that it's known now that even infants in utero perceive their environment, I guess, beyond the narrow enclosure they're in. And this is sort of verified a long time ago by one of my kids who happened to mention to me a perception of something that was actually happening before he was born. And it's not something he could have read about because it was highly personal. And now people are beginning to realize, scientists are beginning to realize that we're becoming conditioned from the moment of inception. And that says a lot about how we hope new parents, whether it's their first or their 17th child, are behaving, because it does impact the child, whether it's born yet or not. And then, of course, after it's born, it has a whole lot more impacting it. The whole psychological studies of what are called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and also about the different attachment styles is what they're called, based on our conditioning. And again, I said that this comes into play even before we're born. We normally fit into some variation of one of 4 different attachment styles. And we'll not go into that, just to know that how we are treated, what our environment is, if it is frightening as it can be in war, or if it is embracing as it can be if things are calm and peaceful and parents are loving, makes a big difference. And then, of course, there's everything in between. And not only that, but these kinds of things are passed down through the generations. So how our parents, how our grandparents, how our great-grandparents, and on back were conditioned in their lifetimes comes down to roost on us, which in a sense gives us a certain responsibility to pass on the positive and let the negative die away. So people don't come to spiritual practice when life is hunky-dory, when things are just lovely and life is flowing along easily and has been for some time and can be expected to, although that's dangerous to expect something to be happening because it may or may not. But nonetheless, when we have experienced positive, generally positive things in our life, there's a natural assumption that it'll continue like that, although unfortunately, or fortunately, either one, I mean, could be a fortunate experience. These days, it's not like that. Even if we've had quite a wonderful life, things happen. People die suddenly. There was the whole COVID epidemic, and I just learned that our dear friend Heather, who with her husband Jonathan are doctors up in Denver, Heather was going to come down and be with us the last day of Sesshin and stay the weekend. Unfortunately, she and John, her husband, got COVID. And I'm sure they have been exceedingly careful, but it finally came to roost. She's recovered fully. Jonathan took the medication that's advised and recovered. And now last night he started being symptomatic again. And so rather than risk carrying COVID down to us, she will not be coming. There have been many, many, many people get COVID. Or in the early days, especially, it was so quickly fatal. And if it wasn't fatal, one suffered significantly for quite a bit of time, often having to be on a ventilator, which is not an experience anybody would really want to have, even though it's life-saving. And there's been so many of that doctors have died, nurses have died, doctors and nurses have burnt out. The whole healthcare system has been plunged into disarray and great loss as a result. And so everything is different just from that standpoint alone. And then you get the divisive politics and the war in Ukraine and all kinds of things. Now, Putin has threatened, he hasn't threatened, he just says he's going to put nuclear arms in the neighboring country to Ukraine, which theoretically puts everybody in the whole universe at risk for nuclear annihilation. And it appears that he's so, I don't know what to say. He's so hell-bent on destroying Ukraine in order to get it back, if that's what it takes, and destroying the whole world, if that's what it takes, that he may well go ahead and do that. So there's the threat of war as well, war all over the world. There are problems with climate change, massive extreme storms, wiped out many, many people in Alabama and Mississippi very recently, and it's expected that they're going to happen again very soon, if they haven't already. It's wild. It's as if the universe has ramped up the intensity of what human beings have to deal with. We can turn our backs on that, assume somehow that everything will be fine, and it may well be. But there's going to be a lot of struggle and a lot of pain and suffering before it does. And even before that, people were coming to Zen practice out of, if it wasn't a concern with pain and suffering, it was a concern with missing something missing, something important missing and vital to return to. And so we start Zen practice. And initially, we have this bright and shiny view of it. We're going to do Zen practice. Oh my goodness. We're going to join a very elite group of human beings who are doing this practice. And initially, it was pretty well presented in that way. Not necessarily elite, but certainly freeing, certainly amazingly freeing from all kinds of suffering. And of course, if you go deeply enough, and that takes a long time, you will be free of suffering, even in the midst of suffering. You know the story of Yaeko Iwasaki, a young Japanese woman in the 1940s, I think it was, whose father, when he hit the age of 60, which in Japan is considered to be a new beginning, you start all over. The 12 signs of the zodiac have come back down to the original one that was there when you were born. And so you start all over again, and that is considered a new beginning. And somehow this point in the schedule of life hit him pretty bad. Okay, he's done one round of the astrology chart. How many more rounds is he actually going to be able to do? And so he got pretty anxious. And in order to work with that anxiety, he started Zen practice. And within a year, because he was determined, committed, ready to walk through whatever he had to walk through, because it was going to be easier than facing whatever it was that he was afraid of in terms of dying, he had a Kensho experience. Yaeko, I'm not quite sure when she was diagnosed with TB, but it was something that was quite frequently diagnosed in Japan back then, because there were as yet no cures for it. Eventually, it became known that certain antibiotics could make a difference. Now, I guess it's ramped up to the point where there's antibiotic-resistant TB. So things change. Is there any security anywhere? Actually, yes, but it's not where we search for it. Coming to Zen practice, we have ideas, of course, about what it's going to bring forth for us. And initially, we get busy with learning the postures and being proud of walking into the Zendo and joining this elite group of sitters. And then after a certain point in time, wait a minute, I was supposed to get Kensho. I was supposed to have this absolute amazing joy and happiness, and that would be forever after, right? Well, not exactly in that format. There is a tremendous amount of work that pretty much everyone, no matter whether they think they do or not, has to do in order to reach that point of being truly 100% free. If that sounds daunting, not to worry. All you have to do is keep plowing along, one foot after the other, and eventually, little by little, you will begin to experience greater and greater levels of freedom. Sometimes people are afraid of freedom. If we're free, how on earth are we going to know what to do, how to act? What's going to guide us in life? Well, if we're truly free, if we have truly let go, then there's a different awareness that comes forth, or I should say is revealed. It's always there. It's just covered up by our conditioning. Different awareness comes forth, and instinctively we sense where to move next, what to do next, how to speak next. And it's not ideas. It's a natural connection with the process of being. And it's always right. In my experience, it's always right. Before that, we have a heavy load of conditioning, no matter how beautiful our life has been. And those of you who have actually started to work on that conditioning before you even got to Zen practice by doing appropriate and effective therapy, and there's appropriate and effective therapy out there, and there's inappropriate and ineffective therapy out there, which can just get you more entangled. But if you've done appropriate and effective therapy, you're a step ahead of the game, because you have a sense that progress can happen. So we come to a Zen center, and we carry with it our conditioning. And it's like having Velcro, as you've heard before. Every time we are covered in any level of Velcro, whether we have patches of it or just are entirely encapsulated in it, as soon as we get to the Velcro that has a different part to it, whether it's the hooks or the fuzzy stuff, zap, we're caught. And there is reactivity when we're caught. But it also offers an incredible opportunity to become free and drop some of that Velcro. And the more we do that practice, the more free we can become as the Velcro begins to drop off. I'd like to share now with you a small portion out of the Rinzai-roku, which is the record of Rinzai. Rinzai Gigen, or Linji, as he's called in Chinese, was a Chinese monk, and it was through him that the Rinzai sect has come down. He was a very dynamic human being, and of course things were different in China back then than they are anywhere in the world right now. Much simpler, but also, like I say, he was pretty dynamic, and you'll hear that here. The role of the teacher is to help the student, a serious student at least, to let go, to become aware of and let go of where they're caught, so that they can become free, so they can drop patches of that Velcro and live a more spacious and free and happy life. That is the role of a Zen teacher. And let me share what Rinzai has to say about that, which is pretty strong. These, by the way, are koans. Among all the students from every quarter who are followers of the way, none have yet come here before me without being dependent on something. That's the attachments. And also, we have to, in order to feel free, in order to feel secure, we hang on to ideas about ourselves, about what we feel like we need, and so we come in upholstered in Velcro to some degree or another. Here I hit them right from the start. If they come forth using their hands, I hit them on their hands. Now this, of course, is not literal. He is speaking of metaphorically here. If they come forth using their mouths, I hit them on the mouths. If they come forth using their eyes, I hit them on the eyes. No one has yet come before me in solitary freedom. All are clambering after the worthless contrivances of the men of old. As for myself, I haven't a single dharma to give to people. This reminds me of Mario Montesa, who you've heard of before, the Swiss-Italian man who was a part of a rock band, a very famous rock band actually, and when he was coming out of a publicity party in London for the band, woke up 6 weeks later in a hospital, completely paralyzed, mute, and totally 100% blind. He'd been stabbed in the heart, rescued soon enough that he was able to survive, but not without damage. Yet he took the opportunity to turn that into a deeply profound, deeply spiritual practice. And by the time I met him at Sogenji, when he came through to stop by and visit the Roshi, he come through India, where he was working. I think he was working with a teacher. I'm not quite sure what he was doing in India other than spiritual practice. And he said to me, "I take away your questions." He wasn't doing anything. His simple presence was healing. I experienced it myself physically because my face was, half of my face was badly paralyzed at the time from an illness. And it had started to heal. The nerves had started to grow back, but they were growing back in odd places, not in their normal channels, because that was apparently full of debris from the depth of the illness. And so I ended up at that time when I met him, and he stayed at Sogenji for 3 weeks. I was the guest housekeeper at the time, my only time I was not Jisharyo. And at the time, I had developed a kind of what seemed like it was going to be a permanent sneer. And I thought, I cannot face human beings with that kind of an expression on my face. And I felt I would probably have to go, when I finally returned to the United States, I would have to probably go live in the woods by myself, because people would be too frightened or too reactive to be around me. When my face did finally go, I mean, when it first went, it was complete. The neurologist that I saw said, "Oh yes, 100% gone. There is no nerve activating the face there." I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't do, my right eye. I couldn't do a lot of things with my face that I had ordinarily been able to do. If I tried to smile, it was a sneer. It was quite an experience. Vesak happened in the middle of that at Rochester, the celebration of the Buddha's birth, which is a great celebration, a very large celebration in Rochester. And many, many people come, even from all over the world. I was assigned to be a sage, which was unfortunate. And initially, I was supposed to be one of the sights that the Buddha saw that turned him to spiritual practice. That would have been more appropriate, I think. But I think somebody figured that that it was not very nice to have me do that, which was too bad. But anyway, so I stood there in the garden of the Rochester Zen Center being a sage, and people brought their kids to the show, and kids would burst into tears and try to get away from me. It was quite an experience. A lot of people did that. People I'd known well, as soon as they saw me, they turned around and left because they didn't know what to do with me. So it was a little challenging. I went to Japan in that condition, and eventually, as my face was beginning to come back, the nerve was beginning to come back, and as I said, it was growing back in the wrong channels, and no channels. It was just making its way through my face. So I was having this permanent sneer, and Mario asked me to go for a walk. And at the time, he was there with his girlfriend. They're still together, by the way, and a man who was a helper for him, because every once in a while he had some physical challenges because of the damage that had been done to him through the lack of oxygen, and also a couple of strokes that he had during his time unconscious in the hospital. And so he went with me, and at his request, it was just him and me. I took him around the neighborhood just a little bit and started up the steps to a Shinto shrine that was there around the corner, kind of. And he turned to me at one landing and said, "Stop, let me look at you." And he put his hands out about, maybe 6 or 8 inches away from my body, and was moving his hands down. And there was a definite feeling that something was happening within me. And so I closed my eyes. And it was interesting that when I closed my eyes, there was no perception of anyone there. Normally, when you close your eyes and you're around somebody, there's an energetic field that is felt. But with Mario, he had let go so completely that there was none. He still is. You can look him up on the web if you want. He has become a spiritual teacher in I think it's the Vedanta realm. And he is a remarkable human being. Our natural way of being, our true nature, is to be that free, that unattached, that if somebody is before us and closes their eyes, they feel no energy of somebody. We develop this energy almost like a force field, I guess you might call it, for various reasons. It's who we think we are, but who we think we are isn't who we really are. On the surface, yes, perhaps. Even that's not necessarily accurate, because we can be so psychologically shut down that who we think we are isn't even there. There's a lot going on in this persona. There's a lot going on in human beings. And it is the province of the Zen teacher to help people see where they are caught. This is what Rinzai is talking about. They come to me stuck in their conditioning. And I see where they're caught and meet it in order to show it to them so that they can free themselves from it. This is the translation, really, of what he's saying. It makes Zen practice not exactly fun until we understand the gift that is. Our whole environment at a Zen center is such that it helps people reach that freedom. For example, there are rules in the Zendo. No moving except when the bells are rung, unless it's specifically said that we can move during a period. For example, during golden hour, the evening period that's a whole hour long, we don't have to sit the whole time in one position, and we can quietly adjust our posture if we want to. And that is in order to help everyone deepen their practice. There are kinhins, the walking meditation, which is something that unless there's something very unusual happening physically for you, it's required participation. And there are the bowls that we use, the nested bowls, the jihatsu that we use with the chopsticks during the meals for a particular purpose. Well, two particular purposes. One is to help people develop increased attention and awareness. It's a strange way of eating for most Westerners, particularly with the chopsticks and these nested bowls. but also to conserve water because we're not having to run our dishes through the dishwasher every day. There are personal dishes. We alone use them. And then at the end of the sesshin, they're given back and washed in the dishwasher. So there are many, many things. A schedule where people are expected to be in the zendo, for example, unless there's something unusual happening for them. For example, if they're sick. And in other words, there are a number of constraints. And that is to help people limit their escape routes. Our life in general offers us all kinds of escape routes, but that's not going to help us reach freedom. If when things get challenging, we turn and run in a different direction, change something so that suddenly it's not challenging. The same thing can happen in Zen, by the way. It's a common thing for people to want to change their practice. But unless there's something very unusual going on within that practice, and it truly is not the one that's appropriate for them, then it's important to stick with it, because what will happen in Zen practice in general is that initially you'll have this honeymoon period, everything will be lovely, and then things start coming up. These mind weeds that Shunryu Suzuki of the San Francisco Zen Center spoke of. And then we have the opportunity to use these uncomfortable recognitions of our behavior to liberate ourselves from it. This is something that not everybody realizes, and some people decide to bolt at times like that, which is sort of sad. The same thing happens in psychotherapy. There's a phenomenon the psychotherapists call the revolving door, where a client goes into therapy with a particular therapist, and they get to a certain point where they're just about to start opening to something that can really be worked through and they can become free of. And it's too much. They decided to leave that therapist. There must be something wrong with the therapist, that these things are coming up and I'm uncomfortable. And so they try another therapist. Same thing. They reach the same point. Same thing can happen with Zen teachers too. It's important to stick with a practice, because that's when you'll see results. And hopefully you have a Zen teacher who will guide you with experience and compassion and help you remove those pieces of Velcro so that you can become increasingly free. And this is what Rinzai is saying when he says, I'll hit you where you're caught, basically. Not physically, but he'll point it up. He won't coddle you. He'll say, okay, let's take a look at this one. And that's the only way you can really become free of it. And you may not have a teacher that says that in those words, but your practice and your encounters in Sanzen will bring it up regardless. Zen practice is just amazing. Once we get over that initial hump and recognize that despite the challenges, it really works, then we pull out the stops and take off, and hopefully never stop. And I'd like to share with you now, with regard to that article that appeared in the Time Briefs this morning, very, very aptly. It says, your struggle is your superpower. That alone is worth sharing without all the rest of it, but I'll share the rest of it as well. This is by Joanne Lippin, and it was March 27th, 2023, that this appeared. She has written a book. We're at we're at a perilous moment in time when so many of us are searching for a new, quote unquote, normal. After the past few tumultuous years, and looking for more meaning in our lives and careers, repositioning our lives, or reprioritizing our lives. We need a guide to get there. She's writing, of course, for people who are working, but it's apt as well for Zen practice. That's why I wrote next, ! All caps, the power of reinvention in life and work. I wanted to answer the question so many of you are asking now, what's next? And how do I get there? The book is the culmination of hundreds of interviews, both with people who had made transitions and with experts who study the process of change, from management gurus to neuroscientists. The people I spoke with traveled astonishingly varied paths. Some switched careers, others had life-changing aha moments, others were trying to pivot after devastating failures or terrible traumas. I spoke with well-known names like novelist James Patterson, formerly an ad executive, and legendary Fed chairman Alan Greenspan, former professional jazz clarinetist, as well as others who you may not know who had equally remarkable pivots. There's the trial lawyer turned TikTok cooking phenom, and the economist who became a cattle farmer, and the telephone repairman turned woman's shoe designer. There's the, quote, budget fashionista, quote, quote, blogger who nowadays advises Black-owned startups, and the mom who quit the corporate world to raise her kids, then reemerged as a nonprofit CEO and mayor. After I found that they all had, I found that they all had similar trajectory in reinventing themselves and their careers. Even those who had the most seemingly extreme makeovers followed surprisingly similar trajectories. I call it the reinventing roadmap, and it progresses through 4 identifiable stages: search, struggle, stop, and solution. Broadly speaking, each pivot begins with a search to gather information. Surprisingly, the search is often unintentional. And of course, our first thing is to come to Zen practice, maybe do a workshop, maybe toy with the idea of doing some Zen practice and checking out different places to maybe do something, or other places like the Tibetan Buddhist tradition or Theravadan. And we may read books, and we may even come to a center in search of what we think we're hoping to get. Then comes the second stage, an uncomfortable, sometimes miserable, middle period of struggle when you're disconnecting from your previous identity, but haven't figured out the next one. This is the time when the shit hits the fan in Zen practice. We come, as we said, and things seem really kind of cool. We're sitting in the Zendo, feeling proud of ourselves for sitting in the Zendo, a new identity as a Zen student. And then as we go deeper in our practice, and as we go to Sanzen, And it's not necessarily something where we're told very sweet things about ourselves and patted on the back. It begins to feel uncomfortable. And if we're sincere in our practice, and I'm using Zen as an example because that's where we are right now in a Zendo doing a Zen Sesshin, we're tempted to change location. We're tempted to leave. But if, like myself, we've recognized that there really is no alternative, that even death isn't a real alternative, because killing oneself doesn't end anything. In fact, it adds a burden of the self-murder to it. So if you realize, if you put yourself into a corner or been pushed into a corner and realize that there really is no alternative but to walk right through whatever you have to walk right through in order to become free, then you have no choice, really. You'll do it. But even then, there are going to be times when you're more motivated and less motivated. When you're ready to roll and dive into the crap, or whether you've just had enough of it. Can't I get out of here? Can't something happen that is going to make a difference? And that is what my early years were filled with in Zen practice. The first 2 or 3 years, trying to think, I came to Rochester I started doing practice in 1974, January 1st, 1974. Encountered the Rochester Zen Center in 75, went to a workshop, and then came to a sesshin in 76, March sesshin, 76. And then by that point, I realized I was going to have to move to the Rochester Zen Center because that's the only way I could practice would be with somebody standing over me with a keisaku, basically, the encouragement stick. I had to somehow get to be living at the Rochester Zen Center so that I would have no choice. I'd have to practice according to their schedule or I wouldn't be able to be there. And I chose that because I had quite a bit of experience in trying to practice on my own. I was living in Turkey at the time, and it was really difficult. I'd just gone through a devastating change in my life, and so every time I sat down on the cushion, when I could get myself to sit down on the cushion, I would burst into tears. Went to the first sesshin, only hoped to survive the schedule. I'm not really good at an expanded period of being awake. Although when I finally did get to the Rochester Zen Center, I ended up doing an awful lot of yasa, which really made a positive difference. And then I realized that what I was dealing with, I just had to let go of this monkey on my back that kept shouting things in my ears. So then I chose to move to the Rochester Zen Center. I didn't know if I would be able to actually be accepted to stay in the Zen Center, to live in the Zen Center or not. I didn't know if I would be able to find work or if I couldn't. I didn't have enough money to bring my furniture with me when I left Turkey. It got sold, and I never received any income from it because the black market, which was where the dollars or where the lira were going to change into dollars, had a rumor that there was going to be a devaluation, and so nobody was willing to change into dollars. And the person that was supposedly helping me get them changed, took the money and bought himself a house in Turkey with it. So that was fine in a way, because I figured I had taken care of some past karma, and I was okay with that. But it left me coming to Rochester, and it was quite some time before I was able to get to live at the Rochester Zen Center. I arrived in November for the November 70 session, and it wasn't until the following August that I actually was accepted to be a resident at the center. In the meantime, I supported myself cleaning houses. And there were, in those days, Zen folks had a really, really high positive reputation as house cleaners, because we did such careful work, such attentive work. Anyway, so then the next several years, until 1981 basically, were pretty dreadful, because I was facing myself every time I sat on the cushion, and plenty of times before that. And I had a lot to face. But gradually it changed. And it became better and better and better. I became freer and freer and freer. And of course, no doubt there's still more to work on. And so I don't anticipate ever quitting Zen practice, because it makes a difference. It works. It's incredible. But it's incredible after you go over that hump. It's like you come to Zen practice with baggage. And I wish now I had printed out that poem about Zazen, because it speaks to that, about walking into the Zendo and with a steamer trunk on my back. Nobody noticed when it fell off and disgorged its contents, including the boots encased in concrete from the failed patio project, and then 3 moth-eaten hats tumbled out and buried a small monk, and various other things. And this is, of course, a metaphor for all of the stuff we've got, all our issues. And eventually the poem ends with nobody. After all that stuff was worked through, it turned out that there was nobody there. And that can seem scary, can seem ridiculous. But who we really are is so free that we are nobody. Just like Mario, who has spent the rest of his life so far working on healing people, that he chose to make a difference in my own life was a tremendous gift. And he simply offered it with no bells or whistles, no expectation of anything in return. All I could do was thank him. But he didn't do it to get thanked. He did it because somebody needed help. So Zen practice offers true liberation, but there is a process. And this is any spiritual practice, if it's genuine, and it doesn't matter whether it's Buddhist or anything else, offers liberation if one goes deeply enough into it with a guide that is truly liberated. One can reach true liberation oneself as a result, but you're going to have to slog through the swamp with all the alligators and poisonous snakes and murky water and roots to trip you, and all the rest before you reach dry land, sunshine, and freedom. You can do it. But this is why it takes faith, doubt, and determination in Zen practice, in any spiritual practice. Faith that there is something that you can open to and realize then that it is worth doing so. And doubt is more something like perplexity. It's like there is something missing, or there's got to be a way out of this pain and suffering. And determination to go forth regardless of what you have to go through. Mingyur Rinpoche, currently a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, has written of when he was a kid, he suffered from panic attacks. And there was no obvious reason for this. But when he was 13, he went to one of the long cloistered retreats that is typical of Tibetan Buddhism. 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, being cloistered and doing intensive practice that makes the sesshin seem like a piece of cake. And there are times when you're in the group chanting or listening to talks or whatever, and there are times when you're alone in your room, and the communal times just terrified him. He would have panic attacks frequently, and he got disgusted with this and decided he was going to go into his room and stay with the panic until it ended. Either he or the panic was going to be king. And, well, that's not the best way to put it. Either he was going to become free of the panic or not. And so he went in and tuned in as Longchenpa, 10th century Tibetan Buddhist teacher, advised, which is the same, more or less, as Eugene Gendlin wrote about as a way to free oneself, which is what Eugene Gendlin called the felt sense, tuning into the felt sense. And Longchenpa didn't call it the felt sense, but he spoke of tuning into the body and before you act out on anything, you've got this icky feeling that comes forth in your body. And most people would choose to escape it by running away or reacting, shouting, punching, crying, hiding, whatever. And you don't do that. Instead, you tune in so completely that uncomfortable feeling is dissolved, freed in its own place without having to be gotten rid of. The same thing as Eugene Gendlin was talking about. His name was Gendlin when he was in Europe, but when he emigrated to the United States, he changed it to Gendlin for unknown reasons. So it works. And as I said earlier, the role of the teacher is to help the student, when they're ready, recognize a caught place and offer guidance to become free from it. It's the most important thing we can do in this life. Our alternative is to go out and about and live however we want to live. And there will be moments of pleasure, hopefully, but also moments of pain. And when we get tired of having the moments of pain, that's when we become more willing to open to the source of the pain, which is attachment. So the struggle makes the freedom possible, because nobody changes without some level of discomfort. If we're forced to change, we've lost a job, and we're wondering how we're going to support our family, it can be quite daunting, quite frightening. But there are ways to work with that can become liberating. But at first, there is that struggle to find that way. And it has to be found within in order to be a genuine liberation. We can't just change jobs, change therapists, change Zen teachers, change locations where we are. It doesn't work. So I leave you with that. I hope that helps you understand what Zen practice is about and what it can provide, which is profound freedom. So I thank you for listening. I'll stop now, recite the 4 vows.